Welcome to This Week in Common Sense, starring Paul Jacob. My name is Timothy Virkala, and on this podcast, Paul and I will be discussing the big stories of the week that have appeared on Paul's website, thisiscommonsense.org. Paul's been writing there since 1999. This is the week, the third week of April 2021.
Policy futility is a bad thing. Recognizing it is good.
So what is policy futility?
Well, if you look under A in the dictionary, it would be under Afghanistan. And that was my conclusion to Monday's piece, Afghan Angst. And, Afghanistan, it's a war. I'm pretty much a dove. Pretty critical of U.S. foreign policy. I think getting involved in Iraq was just the dumbest, hard to think of a stupider move politically, militarily, every way imaginable in history, in all of human history. And so many of our different interventions and so on. Afghanistan's different in the sense that we were attacked. 3,000 people were killed on 9/11. Nobody really disputes that it was Al-Qaeda that did it, and Osama bin Laden. And, he took credit and so on. He was being protected and kind of housed with the Taliban. Not a really friendly, happy-go-lucky bunch of people. The Taliban being kind of Muslim fundamentalist Nazi-like folks, and Nazi-like is probably not the right word, but just kind of bringing back the cut off their hand and shoot them in the street and whip them and kill them, and just not not my cup of tea. We all have our different preferences. Mine is not that. But anyway, Afghanistan is a place where I think we had under just war theory, a right to respond to that attack, to remove that threat. But once you do that, this is the graveyard of empires for a reason. Is it a country or a bunch of tribes who live on this thing that you drew on the map? And it's just, we've been there 20 years. And nobody has a plan that isn't laughable to get to a point where we could leave, where we could say, oh, yes, they've embraced, liberal democracy. It's a pluralistic society. Even far short of that it's a held together, something of a society that might, be a free country or a democratic, semi-free, sometimes. It's just there's no solution. It's futile, and both futile with the D and futile, which is what I meant to say. So this is, Joe Biden recognized it. Trump tweeted that way to go, Joe, except I wish you would have, something. He didn't tweet it because he can't tweet it. I forgot what world we're living in. But basically, Trump kind of took him to task for pushing beyond the May 1st deadline. And it is worthwhile to recognize that, although I have to say, my suspicion is that Trump would not have been out on May 1 had he been reelected. And that we ought not to just, take it to the bank that Mr. Biden is going to have us out by September 11th, which I would agree is just not the date I would have picked. But anyway, May 1 sounds like a good date for me. Now, one of the things that people are going to carp on, because everyone's going to sympathize, including me, is that this is going to be terrible for women in Afghanistan. And of course, that's an argument for staying. It's also an argument for invading about half the world and holding them, occupying them and holding them at gunpoint to, treat women better. And worthy goal, but don't think that's the way to get there. And then I think the other thing is, well, it's going to just, go back to what it was. And the truth is, we would have been better off to have left right after the Taliban was knocked out. And that happened fairly quickly. And just send the message that we'll be back. If you attack us, we have no choice but to be back. And of course, I wish our foreign policy and our domestic policies were always looking for ways to not be obnoxious to people overseas. And there are times that we are. And then, of course, there are times that we're not. And people elsewhere are obnoxious. And then, there are disagreements about who's really obnoxious, and it may be hard to tell. But if they blow up and kill a bunch of innocent people, I'm kind of thinking that didn't justify their position. That's for sure. So we had every right to go to Afghanistan. It's just dumb to stay there. And I saw something today where someone was talking about it. It hurts. It was an article where someone was saying it hurts us because we don't have that as a base of operations and all kind, and I'm no military expert or strategist or anything else, but as somebody who doesn't know anything, but reads these articles by people who claim to, and sometimes do, it just strikes me that being someplace year after year where you're an occupying force is a terrible optic, just a terrible optic. And there are, the people who work in the military, they get paid, they take their chances and everything. They signed up voluntarily for the deal. But just like are your employees in some business or people you're working with in any social or civic endeavor, they're people. And I just don't think we want to create a kind of a job corps of people who are occupiers and people who are living places where they're worried about being blown up and stuff. And, I've always been a little bit concerned about bases everywhere and the alliances and troops in different places. And sometimes we have problems in places like South Korea or Japan or Germany. Soldiers do something bad, or somebody said they did, but they didn't really, and whatever. There's going to be problems. Not like in Afghanistan, not like in Iraq. It's pretty easy to tell when you are liberators and when you are occupiers. And let's not be stupid. I know we want to call it the Defense Department, and we soon will be calling it the Peacekeeping Department, but it's war. And when you send soldiers places, you've got to, we have to be awake, drink some coffee. These are people's children. These are people's parents, and Afghanistan, get out. And if they become a threat again, it was not that difficult to go in and take out the Taliban. And in the scheme of things, I wouldn't have to do it with a couple of buddies on a weekend, but it wasn't that difficult compared to a lot of the things the U.S. military has been asked to do. And of course, we had the Northern Alliance that did the work for us, but we helped. And our military might can be used in that way. Our might at nation building, and this isn't like, oh, Paul, how did you stumble on this brilliant truth? Everybody knows this. Just about every American knows this. Nation building doesn't work. At least it never has in all the times it's been tried. So anyway, hats off to Biden for getting out if he does. And I took McConnell to task a little bit. And I often do, when he's right. And then there are all the other times. But McConnell hit on basically that we're helping our adversaries. He said, apparently we're to help our adversaries ring in the anniversary of 9/11 attacks by gift wrapping the country and handing it right back to them. And, I think a lot of people, kind of think about what we're doing, because basically we have cut a deal This was Obama's idea. We've cut a deal with the Taliban. We've brought them through negotiations into the government. They're now negotiating with the Afghan government. But at first it was just with the US and negotiating what they're going to do and not blow us up, and that we're going to get out at a certain timetable. That was the May 1, September 11th stuff. And so, I'm losing my train of thought as to.
Well, you were talking about the deal that Barack Obama made, and I'm curious about it because I've forgotten what the deal was.
Well, it was Obama who basically began trying to negotiate with the Taliban to get them involved in the government and bring them in, realizing that they control at different times 40% or 60%. Huge swaths of Afghanistan are under Taliban control, and not just rocks and dirt, but people too. And of course, they've taken over major cities at different times militarily. And so, Obama making that move, as ludicrous as it is that you negotiate with them. And I don't think I would have. I think I would have said, I'm getting out of here. And we will do whatever we can to help whoever wants to, try to protect themselves, maybe. And there are different things you could do, but it seems to me that you can't stay forever because they live there and you haven't changed. If you could somehow change, you drop some leaflets and everyone goes, oh, this is the answer, and we're kicking the Taliban out. Well, the truth is then all you needed was the leaflets. We're not going to militarily go in and change everybody's mind. So it seems to me that what Obama was doing, as ludicrous as it sounds on the face of it, was not so ludicrous. And that the only alternative, well, two alternatives. One is to get out without negotiating with the Taliban, which is, I think, what I would have chosen. I know, actually, that's what I would have chosen, right or wrong. And then the other thing you could do is stay and stay and stay and stay. And that's my whole point, that the easiest thing for any president, for any Congress, and anytime I think about Congress, I think of the guy singing on the steps of the Capitol after 9/11, singing God Bless America, because as much as it's moving to hear that song, those guys, that's where they want to be. They just want to be part of the power structure. They want to be the in crowd. And they didn't make it in Hollywood for obvious reasons.
I wanted to mention just how long our experience with Afghanistan is, because I know 20 years for the United States of America, but our cultural roots politically are with Britain, and the beginning of Sherlock Holmes stories began with a discussion of Watson's adventures in Afghanistan. And he had just come back from the war. And one of my favorite passages from Herbert Spencer is an essay called Patriotism, in which he offended a British military man by saying he didn't care who lives or dies in the service of fighting the Afghan war. One of the great passages from a radical libertarian. And so they had experience 120, 140 years ago with Afghanistan. And it was a problem then, and it's a problem now.
Look what happened with the Soviet Union. I'm not suggesting that Afghanistan, destroyed the Soviet Union, which of course would be even more reason to kind of, clap the Mujahideen. But the truth is, it didn't help matters, and it was a huge divisive factor. It created tremendous resistance to the Soviet government among the people. And so Afghanistan has played a tremendous role, but mainly in letting great powers screw up themselves.
Right.
And if we can get out, all the better. But it's the sort of thing that I guess I guess my point before was just, no one wants to be the person who left. If you can just kick the can down the road, and that's I got lost on the analogy of them on the steps singing, God bless America. But everyone wants to do what's going to keep them in power. And the easiest thing to do is kick the can down the road, and not because Biden, he pulls out and then the Taliban does come back, and there are going to be stories of look at the terrible things they're doing. And somehow like it's his fault that other people are doing terrible things in countries that he no longer has troops occupying. We either want to be occupiers or we don't. And I just point out that it is obviously difficult because it's against their political self-interest, and we can poo-poo, sure they're going to do the right thing, some of the time, not if it's against their personal self-interest. Not unless you and I, the mass audience listening here, decide that we're going to hold them accountable, and then it is possible that we could make it to where it was in their interest to do things that they had previously thought was not in their interest. Right now, we don't really figure in the equation very much.
Yeah, there's a strange dialectic going on in the background here, because politicians, like you say, have these incentives, but we should ask, what are the incentives of the Pentagon? Because the Pentagon knows that this is not a success. And yet, in the Pentagon, you will find generals pushing for continued presence in Afghanistan, just as in the Pentagon, there is strong support for 2 more wars at least. There's strong support for an attack upon Iran and strong support for Syria. Now, Iran is the country that the Republicans want to conquer, and Syria is the country that the Democrats want to conquer. Both of these are horrible, horrible ideas. Worse than Iraq, I think. I think Iraq was a cakewalk compared to going into Iran.
Well, Iraq has created all the conditions for for Syria to implode. I know it's largely blamed on climate change. We actually did can't remember whether I did a column at Town Hall or commentary at Common Sense.
You probably did both.
Probably did both, but it was argued that the Syrian Civil War and all those problems were caused by climate change. And it's not a completely erroneous argument in the sense that you did have drought in Syria. Now, there's not evidence that you wouldn't have had it except for science reared its head and said climate change. And, in other words, no one's ever going to know whether there would have been a drought anyway. There wouldn't have been. It was caused by man-made, fossil fuels. But what's really behind the Syrian Civil War? Because, during the same time, as I pointed out in that commentary, it now jumps in my head, California had a really big drought. And there was no civil war in California. So if it was caused by drought, you'd have civil wars where there were droughts. Something else was going on in Syria. It was an incredibly repressive regime. And what's sadly, tragically interesting is that in many ways, if you are a Christian or an Alawite Muslim or any other sect other than, I don't know whether it would be Shia or Sunni or both, maybe they get along there. But basically in Syria, a lot of folks are somewhat okay with Assad because he has been protective of the Christian minority there and other religious minorities because he's part of a religious minority. It's Muslim, but it's I think considered not really Muslim by other Muslims.
Yeah, well, it's a very distant sect in Islam. Yeah, it's the Alawites, and yeah, it's not just the Christians; it's the Jews, and it's not just the Jews; it's the Yazidi. So we have 3 important groups that I think they really are endangered without the Alawites being in charge of the military. It's kind of weird though. You mentioned nation building doesn't work. Well, I think there's two examples in American history where it did work, or 3 examples. 2 of them are Japan and Germany. However, I think I think that's one of the reasons Americans have gone completely crazy on the subject of a possible uh, nation building, is that it is hard to build a nation uh, in an area that you don't understand. And we had some better understanding of Germany and Japan, and we also completely conquered them. And I defy you to conquer uh, a Muslim territory. I just defy you to do it. I don't think it's going to be possible. And part of the deal here is that I think the only way to conquer these people is the worst possible way to conquer them. And it's something they used to say all the time, that the horrific phrase, a Carthaginian peace. And I think
pounding the salt into the soil and so on. Yeah.
Just kill them all, and then destroy the place. And that's something Americans don't do.
Here's the other thing,
right?
Well, there's the other thing is, I think, and then sometimes I joke with people that it's amazing how quickly the Japanese and German people took to peace, being such warlike people. And you can argue, I'm being facetious in terms of calling them warlike people, but people, other folks might argue, well, look, they did this throughout history and they were very warlike. My point is, just like I don't think you and I are responsible for every terrible thing that our country has done, and among a lot of wonderful things and a great level of freedom, we have done some terrible things throughout history. We, as in the U.S. government, we as in not we. And that's the point. It's not really we, and it's not really the German people. The German people didn't say, yes, we want to conquer, most of Europe. We want to fight wars everywhere. That's what we're looking to do. No, that's not what they said. And I think we understand the German people a lot better than we understand the Japanese people, just because the culture is much more similar. I mean, the number one ethnic population in the United States, and I think this is true, it's certainly true among white folks, but I think it's true overall, is German. So we certainly had a little bit. We didn't have to do quite the studying to figure them out. But really, in both cases, they were industrial societies. So it wasn't as if we had to take a feudal, like Afghanistan is to a degree, and build that up and create all the social structures and other things that societies need to be cohesive and peaceful and productive and so on. And so it's easy to see that, and I could argue you didn't have to nation build, you just had to kind of nation redirect. But go ahead.
I was just going to say that, I mean, they got the Emperor of Japan to collaborate with the American occupation. And that was key. I mean, yes. MacArthur was genius, right? And in the Western Front, Hitler was out of the picture. And it was a complete conquest. The Nazis were defeated. Right. And also the Japanese army was defeated, and there was really no question about that. The next step would have been the slaughter of lots of civilians. I mean, the invasion of Japan would have been horrific. So they each sort of, they could go back to being cooperative societies, because Germans and Japanese both were cooperative people. They're people who work together well, and that's the most important thing in a society, is can you work together well? And so those nations could be rebuilt pretty well, I think. And they did a fairly decent job in both cases. But the idea that we can do that in Afghanistan, which has no history of cooperating well, or a place like Somalia, or I just don't believe that these other places are good. Now, Iran is a place where they can cooperate well, but they have, I think that the Islamic element is going to be too big a hurdle for Americans to redirect away from the Khomeini regimes and so forth.
Well, you certainly, the majority in Iran, from what I can gather, is pro-democratic. Every time that they have elections and pro-democratic candidates are allowed to run, we pointed out in previous podcasts that in Hong Kong, one of the reasons China clamped down was that the election in December for these little local things, all of a sudden pro-democracy candidates got in the races and won 87% of the seats. That sent a message that this is what the people want. Well, every time the people in Iran have been able to send a message and elect people, and they've got the Ayatollah and the religious folks dictating who can run or can't run and so on. But anytime they've had a choice, the pro-democracy candidates are winning, and the pro-human rights and so on. And so but there's a lot of firepower and threats and violence on the religious side, and it's a sizable minority. So it's a very tough situation, and people may remember the green fingers of the woman who was shot dead, and by other people showing after they voted, they had their fingers, I think, were marked in green, and or maybe that was just a symbol in the protest afterwards. But basically, huge opposition to the government in Iran, and huge support for democracy. And it is a fundamentally, I think, different place than Iraq. And I don't believe some places, they're just not ready for democracy. That's not the point. They're not prepared to hold it against the enemies of democracy. And that's the problem in some of these places. It's not a slap at these people or somehow they don't deserve to be free. They absolutely deserve it. They're just not likely to be able to hold it because they don't have the social institutions and other institutions that will help hold it together. In the same way as in the United States, why are things so scary? And we should go to our second script of the week on Tuesday, which was media corrections. And one of the problems with our media is, and when you say that, you're talking about a zillion different outlets, but I'm pretty much talking about the most powerful ones. And I think, you could separate out Fox, or some people, separate out the Wall Street Journal or National Review or whoever you want to name on the conservative side. But for the most part, I think they're falling for a lie. I mean, they're partisan media too, in a sense. And you may agree with the partisanship of it more than you do other partisan media, but it's still partisan media. And on Tuesday we talked about 3 stories that all come together and basically send a terrible message, and then both send that message in terms of sending the wrong, incorrect, dishonest message to the public, but also sending a message that Thomas Jefferson said it was more important to have a free press than have a free government, because if you didn't have the free press, you couldn't keep a free government. And if you had a free press, you could get a free government. And we have a free press, and it sure doesn't help in any way, shape, or form, it seems like, in getting more freedom and getting an honest discussion. I mean, I always harp on we're not in the discussion, and I think so much of that is the media's attitude. And the media has an attitude of we are sheeple who they need to browbeat into thinking the right way. And so if that's your attitude, well, no wonder we're not getting good information. I mean, it's too dangerous for you guys to give us good information. And let me just talk about the 3 stories. The first one is the kind of gotcha video journalism of Project Veritas. And as we've mentioned them before, James O'Keefe heads the organization. They had one, I think, really serious misstep where they were trying to sell a phony story to the Washington Post, in essence, to prove that the Post would take a phony story that was along their narrative, and then they could embarrass the Post. Well, the problem is when you're putting phony stories in the newspaper, that's not a good thing to do, whether you're trying to embarrass somebody or not, it just seemed to not be well thought out. Other than that, they've taken down Acorn. They've shown a lot of outrageous corruption, outrageous things said on video you just can't believe. And of course, it's always reported in the mainstream media. The fake news, that's the fake news that Donald Trump calls the fake news instead of the other fake news. But in these videos, they always are talking about they were edited and this and that. Unless you can argue against what's presented, every video you've ever seen has been edited. Clipping off the first part where you were taking pictures of, where you turned the camera on and it was facing the cement ground. Nobody presents that as part of their video. And so they have no argument against him, but they just attack him. Anyway, he's talking to the technical director, who I think is right below the CNN, director. And so he's talking about basically that their whole focus was to get Donald Trump out of office. And it's why people like me often talk about the media as the Democrats' super PAC. Now, I'm not looking to regulate the media. I'm not looking to regulate people's speech, but CNN has just been outrageous in blocking stories that they thought might hurt the Democrats, in running stories that turn out not to be true, that hurt the Republicans. And it's despicable. But what was interesting is it came out just as we got news that the Russian bounty story, this was not really believed by the intelligence agencies. Now, this was done during the campaign, came out, it was big news, New York Times story. Intelligence agencies say, they couldn't name them, of course, they had to stay off the record, but, and I know sometimes people want to dismiss stuff, and I don't believe anything that's off the record. Well, there's just too much good information that has been important throughout history that's off the record that you're not going to get if someone has to lose their job in the morning. And so I don't go there. I'm not willing to say, no, I don't believe anything but that's why you have to have a certain amount of trust in the media. And there's none of it. And there shouldn't be any trust because they're not trustworthy. So anyway, but this was off the record intelligence reports. It was just echoed throughout the media. And the whole point of it, the headline was, Russian secretly offering, bounties to kill Americans, and Trump administration considering for months what to do about it. Well, it turns out they weren't considering for months what to do about it. That's just a bold-faced lie, because the intelligence agency said, no, there's a low to moderate confidence. Let me just clue you in on what that means. It means we don't believe it. It means we have no reason to believe it. They hear a zillion different things in the chatter, but some of it you believe and some of it you don't. They did not believe this. It was splashed all over the media. It was splashed all over the media as if it was gospel truth. And that's a big, big problem. And of course, then right on the tail of that, we find out that the officer, Sicknick, who was killed, well, I was just about to say, was killed in the Capitol riot on January 6th. That's the police officer who was killed. But the medical examiner in Washington, D.C., now the New York Times was also the people who brought us that, the first people to say this person has been killed in the riot. He left after that day, he went to the hospital, and he died from his injuries. And of course, if someone is injured in a riot and they had said that he had had his head smashed by a fire extinguisher, which is kind of a heavy metal thing to have your head smashed with, and went home later that day and then went to the hospital, because that could easily happen, and the people who had that fire extinguisher would be guilty of murder and should pay by going away to prison for the rest of their life. I mean, it's just a horrible crime, except it didn't happen. He had in the autopsy, no abrasions on his skin, no physical trauma, injury whatsoever. There was later a story that there was some sort of bear repellent or some sort of terrible chemical thing that no sign of it whatsoever in the autopsy. He had what appeared to be a couple of strokes in rapid succession and died from it. It's a horrible thing. And of course, it doesn't somehow make attacking and smashing out windows, in the Capitol, it doesn't make that okay. And, so it's not somehow, oh, well, then that was really nice of them, or that the fact that he was involved in that crazy, horrible riot didn't have some impact that triggered something. We don't know everything that happens in someone's body. So the point here is not that somehow, this justifies anything that the rioters did. But this tells us something about the media. And we hear about confirmation bias, and people believe this or they believe this. This is confirmation bias. And the truth is it's not, because this is narrative bias. This is bias that comes this isn't, hey, I've heard other things and this is kind of the way I believe. This is a full-fledged, here's my ideology, and I'm slapping it on everything that comes in and spinning it up nicely and feeding it back to you. And this is not the news. At the end of this, I said, that's the news, ? Well, the answer is no, it's not the news. This is a sad propaganda parade, just day after day, day after day. And it's a huge problem, because information is power. It'll set us free. All those things are true. And we're getting it cut off. We don't get it from the media. We're not getting it on social media. And if anyone wants to say anything outside the lines, they're being cut off in social media. And look, let's just stipulate 9 out of 10 things said outside the lines are crap. A few of them occasionally will be dangerous. Truth is, I'd rather somebody say those so you could say, hey, look, that guy's dangerous. It's good to know. But society will grind to a halt and move at glacial pace if we don't get that 1 out of 10 that's outside the lines. In other words, if you think you can, just say, we're just going to control everything and not allow a robust debate. If we all already know everything, there's no reason to discuss it anyway. We just listen to the experts and they'll tell us exactly what to do and don't mouth off. We've chosen a different societal makeup, at least, or so I thought. And anyway, this is Tuesday's media corrections. We have to find a way to create them, to correct the media. And a lot of it is going to be, like any great change, creating the media. And it's kind of one of the promises of social media and the internet and phones with good cameras and video, is that it's easier to create media these days. But we're not catching up. We need some boosters, I think, to be able to compete with a stagnant and controlled and spun information system.
Well, you probably can guess my reaction. This is you said you didn't want to have any regulation of the media. Well, I want to have regulation of the regulators of the media, and that's the CIA and similar organizations. I think it all comes from the corruption of the CIA. I don't think there's any doubt of that. From Operation Mockingbird on, this is what our government spy people have been doing, and it's disinformation. And you mentioned that story. That was just made out of the whole, somebody made it out of the whole cloth. They invented the story of the fire hydrant. And that's the kind of thing that the CIA has been doing in other realms. And they do that because they think it's a national security. But they determine the national security. Congress doesn't determine what that is. It's not even the president. This is a rogue agency.
No, and it constantly seems to escape, with the church commission, other things that found, oh my goodness, they're going way outside the lines. The whole, I can't remember now, was it Section 230 or no? I'm getting that confused with the one on social media, but the section of the Patriot Act that they claim justified scooping up everybody's information and violating everybody's Fourth Amendment rights in a massive way without any even pretend justification. That was never in the law. That was something that they just stretched the law out of all proportion to do. And of course, there's a story, and right before we started this, that I didn't get a chance to get all the way through, but supposedly the post office, which half the time pretends it's a private organization, but the post office's inspector's office or something is doing some sort of, I shouldn't have even said it because I hadn't read the whole article. I don't know it all. We'll be talking about it, I'm sure, in the future. But there's some article about some police organization within the post office that's not just snooping on mail, which of course certain things are photographed and there's all kinds of stuff that goes on. I mean, it's in public, I guess. But they are snooping on social media. And by what right they have any operation that's, they're running billions of dollar deficits. What are they spending money investigating our social media use? So, we have a lot of problems with secrecy and people run amok. And look at the FISA court. Oh, is it really so surprising that they were being lied to and nobody really seemed to catch it? But because there's nobody on the other side, because it's all done in secret. We still don't know a lot of things about this court. You go back to the drone strikes. Look, we want our people to survive and live, and the ability to kill terrorists with a drone instead of having to send troops different places makes a lot of sense, unless you don't have any real legal definition of terrorist, unless you don't have any legal checks to make sure that you're just not murdering people anytime you feel like it. And I'm not suggesting that that's what they've been doing, but anytime you don't have controls, well, then maybe, we thought he was a bad guy. Someone told us he was a bad guy, and they told that because they wanted him killed. Or you're killing American citizens. What's his name? Alakwi. I can't think of his I can't think of his name. But it's Anwar Alaki. He was a propagandist, American citizen, propagandist for Al-Qaeda. Never convicted of anything, charged with anything in U.S. court, but he's in with the terrorists, and there's not much argument about that. Well, they take him out in a drone strike, but then later they take out his son with a drone strike. This is both Obama, and then when Trump comes into office, Trump takes out his daughter, also an American citizen, with a drone strike. Maybe they're all justified. I don't think so. But maybe I'm wrong and they are all justified. I'm sure when we review them and people look at them in the light of day, but they're not ever going to look at them in the light of day. They're not reviewed at all. And so it's just, you cannot allow government tremendous powers in secret that are never reviewed. If you do that, are you really going to be surprised if you ever pull up the blinders and look that it's going to be ugly, ugly, ugly? I mean, all you have to do is read 2 seconds of history. Just pick any century. It's the same history. You cannot allow people to do that. And anyway.
There is no justification for any of that. By old ideas of just war theory and by any old ideas of diplomacy, America is a rogue nation that basically declares the whole world its illegal playing ground to kill people. That's an amazingly brazen and horrific policy. I don't see how anyone could ever have justified it. And there's no declaration of war even. Who are they declaring war on when they bomb somebody in Yemen? It makes no sense.
Whatever you're doing, yeah, and we can say it makes no sense. I'm not arguing with you because I think you're right. But come on, make the case then. It's a little bit like some of the, there were all kinds of irregularities with this last election. But if you come out and say there's fraud or there's all these irregularities, then speak to it. And from what I heard, there was never speaking to it. And it's the same thing here. I don't think you can justify the way you're running this program. I'm not sure you could justify having the program. Why don't you try? Because we live in a society in which we're the boss and you got to come to us. I know you don't like it. You don't like that we're the boss, but you got to come to us. Except they've kind of said, no, we don't have to come to you. We're going to get leave. Your representatives who you can't stand and who don't represent you, they've given us just carte blanche. And that's, that's a real problem.
Well, we've only gotten 2 out of 3 pieces for this week. So, and we're ways into the podcast.
We are. Well, let's deal with something that is ripping our society apart. But this is a weird take on it, kind of, because Wednesday, Pick Your Poison is about, well, I asked to start out, are cigarettes containing menthol flavored tobacco racist? And this is all...
it's so dumb.
Here's the stats. The Washington Post argued that Blacks are disproportionately killed through cancer and other harms of tobacco use by menthol cigarettes. And it's true. Now, you might ask, why are Black Americans being harmed more by menthol cigarettes than white Americans are? Well, because white Americans have chosen, overwhelmingly, 71% of white Americans who smoke want to kill themselves with non-flavored tobacco. On the other hand, 85% of Black Americans who choose to smoke and want to kill themselves with tobacco want to kill themselves with a menthol flavored variety. So the menthol flavored variety disproportionately kill Blacks, just like the non-menthol variety cigarettes disproportionately kill whites. And I'm mad at the cigarettes. I'm mad at the smokers. But this is ridiculous. There is a petition. It's a process they have where you can officially petition the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, to outlaw things, or maybe you can legalize things that way. I don't know. Maybe we should check. But there's a petition to ban menthol flavored cigarettes, and it's all predicated on that they disproportionately kill people of color, and really Blacks here, not all people of color, because I don't know that Hispanics, I'm not sure what they smoke, and really I don't intend to ask. So I'm not going to be any help there. The funny thing about this, it's not funny at all, but the strange thing is that, one of the commenters at the Washington Post, it's funny because my wife always tells me what she's read in the comments. I never read the comments. She always does, but she gives me, the best ones. And then I realized, boy, there's a lot of great stuff in these comments. But it's harder to, you can't punch down and, give some commenter a hard time. Usually. But here, someone left a comment that just so easily pointed up the whole thing. Banning a certain type of cigarettes, she says cigarettes, because Black people tend to favor them is stupid and patronizing. That's the two things it is. That's exactly right. Either have the courage of your convictions and ban all cigarettes, and then in parentheses, LOL, laughs out loud, because obviously that's a stupid thing to try to do, or leave this alone. And obviously the answer is to leave it alone, and leave us alone in the process. But there's something else here that was interesting in this story to me. And that is that one of the people arguing against banning, civil rights people were on both sides, but one of the civil rights movement people who was against banning was Reverend Al Sharpton. And there was a point made that he received money from R.J. Reynolds, which makes Newport's the best-selling menthol cigarette. And he acknowledged that he received money from them. Said it had no effect on his, the same as politicians do. And I think sometimes it's true and sometimes it's not. But what's interesting to me is on something like this, where he wasn't in the ban it because it's disproportionately affecting Black people. And increasingly, of course, there aren't Black people and white people. There's all these people who are somewhere on that spectrum, and we love them all. But it's anyway, now I've lost my train of thought. Where was I headed with this?
Well, it's something to do with Al Sharpton. I am actually curious about what the hell you're talking about.
Here's the whole thing. So he takes money in this instance, and we find out about it because he's not part of the critical race theory crowd, or what. In other words, he's on the other side in this case. He's saying, don't ban it. And of course, one of the points he makes, which makes a lot of sense, is, yes, you're going to give the police another reason to engage our people. I mean, he just makes the point. You can't put people in jail for this. This is going to be, and of course, we all remember probably Eric Gardner in New York, who was selling individual cigarettes. Cigarettes are so expensive in New York. People get cigarettes from somewhere else and go there and sell them on the street.
Without the taxes.
And so police got him, and they got him in a headlock, and it looked like he was breaking the law. But because of that stupid law on cigarettes and their crazy, insane taxes on cigarettes, the police put him in a chokehold. And because they shouldn't have put him in a chokehold, I think from their own policies and so on, he ended up dying. He was killed by that chokehold. So it's, these things have consequences. And if you want to make everything illegal and hire police to enforce it, you're going to have problems, especially when you're policing it in a racially defined way. So it's, but what I also thought was interesting about this is just that we found out about Sharpton getting money. And I suspect if he were on the other side, he would have never been asked. It would have never been looked into. And we would know nothing about whether he's getting money or he's not getting money.
Of course, that was just one of his shakedown operations, right?
Well, I don't know that. But that's certainly alleged a lot of times that in essence, they,
that's the whole industry is shakedown.
Well, and let me just let you in on something. If you end up not being Sharpton, but being in the Congress, you're oftentimes, it seems like that same dynamic is there. And I thought one of the great things that this will date me, when Steve Forbes ran for president, what was that? 88? Not 88. It was 96, maybe.
92 and 96. Didn't he run twice?
He did run twice, but I think it was 2000 and 96. I don't think
it was 96. Right. Oh, that makes sense. Yes.
But anyway, he talked about term limits and he talked about a flat tax. And one of the arguments he made is that both would be anti-corruption and that the flat tax would take away the ability of Congress to give all these different loopholes and stuff. And there are people doing all kinds of things for some little line in the tax code that wouldn't make any difference to you and I, but makes hundreds of millions of dollars of difference to them maybe. And anytime the Congress takes up taxes, they've got a lot of people opening up their checkbook and writing a check. And so they play this same shakedown game in one way or another. They have a lot of favors to give out, and that's just kind of a barter economy. So it's
Well, sure. That's how pressure groups work, right? I mean, one thing is a legal action on the part of Al Sharpton. If you don't pay me in my organization, then we're going to call you racist, and we'll bring you through the courts for not abiding by the strictures of the EEOC. Isn't that what's called, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and similar organizations?
equal employment, I think,
Yeah,
opportunity.
yeah, and similarly with all this tax stuff is that the politicians have power, and they can
Right.
with a half a breath they can move from one favor to a
They could
disfavor.
make a call to OSHA. They could come see how your warehouse is if you're violating any regulations.
Yeah,
There's all kinds of things that they can do, and real people who are involved, not like other people aren't real people, but people who are really involved in business. I remember one time talking about, because we had reporters and term limits going after that we had money and we're doing things, and what do they want? And I pointed out that to suggest that people are giving money to the term limits movement to have some special in to get goodies from Washington is absurd, because they have a system right now that works like a charm for that. And the last thing they would want to do is completely upend that system and have a bunch of people in that, even if they could convince them to give them favors, could only be there for a short period of time, and then they have to convince somebody else. So it's anyway. There's a lot of that that goes on.
right. And I think it was Tacitus who said that he explained it all with one sentence: the more the laws, the more corrupt the state. And that's what we
Yes,
have here. That's the reason we don't want to always be increasing legislation, is that we want to decrease corruption. But Americans so far don't have it in their heads to really get that this is a big deal. At least Democrats certainly don't understand, and Republican politicians haven't been helping.
right, right. Even when they understand in their speeches, they don't understand in their votes.
Yeah.
But
Generally a useless crowd. We'll talk about I don't know if there's a more useless group of people than
you know,
most Republican politicians.
it's interesting that I remember in 2006 when Democrats took over the Congress, when Nancy Pelosi first became Speaker. Nobody criticized the Republican Congress as harshly as my Republican friends, and the same has been true oftentimes, that my Democratic friends, when there's been a Democratic Congress, have just been livid at how bad they are. And it tells you something when people are upset with the Congress, even and they're engaged in politics, and they know it's their party's Congress, and they're terribly upset with it. And it keeps happening, and it keeps happening both ways. It tells you you've got a very structural problem. Hey, we should I think just quickly touch on the last two commentaries of the week. One of which, Thursday's, the YouTubeification of China, and it's a theme that we've talked about a lot, and it actually really combines two themes we've talked about a lot. And I hope that it's not a surprise combination, because we have mentioned that they fit together like hand in glove. And what I'm talking about is big tech censorship and the overriding dangerous goal of the Chinese Communist Party, which is really Chinazis, not communists so much. We had a comment on this particular commentary from Tom Knapp, who's a regular commenter, who said, "I kind of like Chinazis," and I may be overstating how he said it, but I kind of liked it at first, but enough already with the Chinazi. It's too much or something. And I actually spent like 5 paragraphs responding to him, because I think it's so important that I think the Chinese Communist Party is not communist. it's much more Nazi-like. And I think that's important. And I think it's important that we define who they are, because there's so much misinformation, and they're very good at it. And people who are going to want to do business with a country that has 1.4 billion customers are going to be given all the reasons why and so on. That disinformation is a problem.
There always going to be a Prescott Bush willing to do business with the Nazis, just as there are many big corporations and business interests in America who want to do business with the Chinese government and the Chinese operations, even if it means doing horrible things to Americans at the same time.
No, that is the problem, is that I know that if the American public is not engaged, that everyone who speaks to a government official is going to be wanting to do business in China. And those government officials are used to talking to people who want to do business and want to, in other words, the whole conversation is going to be how to facilitate doing business with China. And that's not what I want that conversation to be. But what's interesting is that the Chinese are very good at misinformation, at saying ridiculous things and just sticking with them and saying them again and again, and getting useful idiots to go along with those things. And that's helped by our own big tech censorship. And there is a channel, China Uncensored. And I kind of like this guy. I've referred to him as daddish, bad dad jokes and stuff like that, bad puns. But he talks about the latest news. He does probably 5, 6, 7 videos a week. I mean, there are a lot of videos coming out, but they're very informative. I kind of like his sense of humor, but he has been talking about the problem of being demonetized on YouTube hiding videos, taking down videos, all kinds of problems. And he says that it seems to be related to him showing bad actions by the CCP. And you can see where it could be on the edge, where he's showing a video that's showing them doing bad things like beating people up and so on. And so they have to put a warning on it or something. And boy, that's too bad. But he goes through one thing after another. And then if you go to the YouTubeification of China at thisiscommonsense.org, there's a link to his video and you can watch it. It's probably 7, 8, 10 minutes. But it's very interesting because he goes through some of the different videos, and it's just obvious that they're either getting pushback from China, from the CCP, and the Chinese regime has hired millions of people to do pushback on social media. And so, they may have gotten 500,000 complaints about his YouTube video, but for whatever reason, his getting the truth out through YouTube is incredibly difficult, and far more difficult than it should be. His videos, if you watch one, you'll realize there's nothing here that should be blocked, that should be stopped. You can agree or you can disagree, but it's totally ridiculous. And again, we see our media, on the one commentary, with all these phony stories, and that feed their own narrative, that no one's surprised that that's the way their mistakes are adding up. We see a totalitarian, Nazi-like power clamping down on freedom, putting millions of people in concentration camps, and trying to shut people up about mentioning it. And when I say people, I'm not just talking about little folks like you and I'm talking about Australia. Australia called for an investigation, an independent investigation in the coronavirus and COVID-19 spreading throughout the world. And now all of a sudden they're embargoed. All kinds of goods are being blocked in China. And they have done, well, there is so much at thisiscommonsense.org about what's happening in China and Hong Kong, Taiwan, Xinjiang region, and the Uyghurs, organ harvesting, you name it. Go there, use the search function, put in China, put in Hong Kong, put in Taiwan. You'll get a ton of information about what's happening. I wrote a piece called All the Tyranny in China. Short commentary, too short, because I could not fit all the tyranny in China. I did several after that saying, oh, I forgot this tyranny. So anyway, there's a lot more information at thisiscommonsense.org. And then on Friday, we basically said, stop yanking our clocks and time around. And of course, interestingly, it was Tricky Dick Nixon. He wasn't the first. Woodrow Wilson was the first who did daylight savings time during World War I, and then it was quickly changed after the war. Same thing happened during World War II. Roosevelt did it. And I've heard all kinds of different justifications, but it seems the main one is to just have more waking hours that are in the sunlight, as if we couldn't adjust our schedules the way we wanted to. But I guess in war, maybe you've got some good reason for that. Maybe not, but people will probably go along. But Nixon did it during peacetime, kind of. I mean, it was during the Vietnam War, but it was, that was a sideline war we were doing over
and
here.
it was winding down too. It was really in reaction to the energy crisis.
Yes. Yeah, you forget about that embargo, that OPEC embargo, and but anyway, or was the OPEC embargo, was Nixon still in at that point, or was Ford when they actually embargoed?
I don't know when the embargo came in. I just know that it was part of the wacky world of the 1970s, which was kind of formative for you and me, probably, because that's when we were teenagers, basically. And
well, I've been a teenager again and again. So, but yeah, that was the first time I was a teenager.
Okay, very good.
First decade I was a teenager. But what's interesting is and I didn't realize it was so overwhelming, but people do not like this falling back and springing forward and so on. And so you would think you would just go to, the regular time. And how would you tell that time? Well, the only real way, it seems to me, to set up how you do your time when it's noon or midnight or 1 o'clock or 6 o'clock is that at noon, the sun is right straight above you, right? I mean, that's how it works. And all over the world, at noon, you look up, and of course, it's noon in China. It's not going to be noon in the US. It's going to be midnight or somewhere abouts. But that's not how they're doing it. They want to do it to where it's daylight savings time year round, so that the moon will be straight up at 1 o'clock, I guess.
The sun.
The 11 a.m. or 1 o'clock?
The sun.
The sun. Then, yeah, not the moon. Seems somehow wrong, but.
Yeah, that's my position, is that it's just one of those many ways you call it cheating. It's just not wanting to stick to the natural thing. Now, you didn't mention, really, you didn't confess to the most obvious thing. There is cheating now because we have time zones, and every time zone standardizes it to I guess to the middle of the time zone, where the true noon is, where the solar noon.
You're saying that sun might be a little.
Well, it changes. It varies from place to place, and they did this in the 19th century because train schedules are all getting all messed up, because you go from one place to another and nothing made sense. So you had telegraphs. So they had the ability to make sense of it all, getting 24 time zones around the world, right?
Right.
I believe China right now has only one time zone, so that means that they have quite a. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the case. But I don't like the idea of just shifting time zones, as you put it, 1 hour to the east. That bothers me. But Nixon's thing was that he wanted to have a year around daylight savings time.
Well, and he wanted the same thing that, and we should mention it. The bill is. Marco Rubio and who is the other person on the bill? Why can't I think of that at the moment? Where is that? Patty Murray. Patty Murray.
Yeah, my senator, who went in her first few years in Congress, had the reputation for being the stupidest person in Washington, D.C. But now I
That was not her official documents, though.
no, but now she's been eclipsed so many times that no one believes that anymore.
Wasn't she she was the mom with tennis shoes or
Oh,
something?
yeah.
Wasn't that
yeah.
how she started with it was a very kind of Washington state, or maybe it was the mom with Birkenstocks or something, but it was
They say tennis shoes, right? And this is the state that had our best governor was a woman who lived in a trailer. So that's
who was the governor though? Ruby something? Who was is that the right name? Who was your governor? She was a Democrat, I think. She was
that's what I'm trying to remember now. I can't remember her name. I have a book by her. She became an anti-environmental. She became an enviro skeptic.
Dixie Lee Ray, not Ruby, but
Dixie Lee Ray, and she was a character. Oh, she was a wonderful.
She was a character, and I kind of liked her.
I liked her a lot. She's probably the only
all her positions, but
she's probably the only governor of a Washington state that I've ever cared for. Dan Evans was the big Republican before her time.
Yes, yeah,
and he was famous around the nation. I think
he had kind of that the very clean, Tim Penny-esque. That was the guy from Minnesota who kind of took lots of 80-20 issues, and but I like Dixie Lee Ray was kind of a character, and I think people, they want to feel like you're your own person. We've talked about this before, but I'll bring it up again, and then we'll let people go back to the rest of their life. Actually, we're not holding you at hostage, but now I'm going to forget what I'm about to what I was trying to say.
Yeah, I don't know what you were saying about Dixie Lee Ray, but we liked her, but we didn't like her enough to reelect her.
Oh, didn't she get elected twice at a different time she ran or something? But no, here's what I was thinking about. We have talked before about what a mistake it was for Elizabeth Warren to have the beer, the little thing early in her campaign where she had the beer to show she was just like one of us. Dixie Lee Ray, I mean, she might have had a beer, I don't know, but if she was going to have a beer, it was because she wanted to have a beer, not because she wanted you to think she was going to have a beer just like you would. And it's why someone like a Daniel Patrick Moynihan in New York, did the average New Yorker, did they talk like Moynihan? Did the average person in New York think, not that he was the greatest guy in the world or anything, and he wasn't, but did they like him because he was just like them? No, they liked him because he was just like him. And that's what I like about Dixie Lee Ray. That's what I like about certain folks. It's what I've said for years, for decades actually, that I could vote for Ralph Nader because I have some respect for him, even though he's wrong about a majority of issues, I think. But on the issues he's wrong about, I don't think he'd cheat me. I'd be able to fight him on. And on the issues he's right about, he'd actually care about them and help. And I'd be able to help him get those enacted. And it's about people who are real and who believe in things, and we can work together and negotiate and figure things out. What we have in Washington, and people have said it's partisanship and it's because they're so ideological. The problem in Washington is not clashing ideologies. It's clashing crooks. It's clashing self-interested snobs. And that's not as healthy. Clashing ideologies, in my experience in Washington, when you're fighting with people who believe in something, there's kind of mutual respect in the same way there is at the end of a football game where you were trying to tackle the guy and smash him into the into not the pavement, but the turf, and afterwards you got to respect and you're shaking hands, and I think that's more apt to happen when the fight is ideological or on principle, really. ideological, kind of sounds like you're bringing an awful lot to the table. But when it's on principle, when it's about money, you got what you have in Washington today, which is, wait a second, I'm going to cut you because I had to have my cronies in the bill. No, I get to have more money for my cronies. So
I just find it weird that there's a policy, the common policy of the United States, the summertime daylight savings time, which jiggers with the time, and nobody really likes it because we don't like going back and going forward. And the politician's answer is to make the jiggering normal rather than just go back to the more natural system. That's the part that I find so weird, because I just find it just a silly policy. Even if it does some good, it still seems a silly policy, because you should be able to bear with.
right.
I mean, it's get advantage somebody. Well, you confess that you like what element for what has to be the silliest reason I've ever heard. Then I think you should confess to this.
Well, no, it's from time to time I'm talking to people who are in Hong Kong or Taiwan, and when it's daylight savings time and we jump ahead an hour, it's exactly 12 hours. So it's the exact same time, just night instead of day, and that kind of thing. And so it's easy to remember. And otherwise I have to add an hour to it, which is, that there's such tough. +1 is always such difficult arithmetic to do. But there's another aspect of this jump forward and fall back that I have to admit to, which is I don't mind falling back. It's like in the fall, and it never quite has the payoff that I'm expecting. I'm going to get a whole extra hour of sleep, because it just never seems to work out. But looking forward to it, I'm always very happy about the fall back part. I feel like I cheat the universe out of an hour. And then, of course, the next day you realize, no, I didn't really get away with that. But
I don't remember. Did you quote that great old line about the Indian blanket, the Indians, the famous Indian line about the blanket?
no.
Where was that? The idea is somebody famous compared daylight savings time to white man's idea of cutting off the top part of the blanket and sewing it onto the bottom and thinking he has more blanket.
Yeah, I did not use that, but I've heard that. That is a good one.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, till next week, and you can visit us at thisiscommonsense.org.
Well, we're going to end the podcast right there, and I don't need to say anything more beyond this. Just like that.
Yeah, there you go.
We can cut it right now.
Cut.
Oh, before we go, let's get a few things straight here. The full quotes for Tacitus and Herbert Spencer. Tacitus wrote, Corruptissima republica plurimae legis. The more numerous the laws, the greater the corruption of the state. I usually translate it just as, the more the laws, the more corrupt the state. But that's probably too poetic or too concise for what people really understand well. There's no need to translate Herbert Spencer. He wrote it in English in 1902 in the essay Patriotism in Facts and Comments. And he was talking about the Afghan War at that time. And he said, when men hire themselves out to shoot other men to order, asking nothing about the justice of their cause, I don't care if they are shot themselves. So we made a number of errors, of course, in our discussion, but I wasn't wrong to say that China has one time zone. And it is hard to say Anwar al-Awlaki, but I think I got it about right.